Looks like we may be live.
All right. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Happy Wednesday.
Another day in
paradise. Show number 14. I got Brian here with
me.
Live
with Derek.
We're actually live. It kind of looks like we're in different rooms, so I can still kick him down to the table.
Yeah, I'm still digitally with you, but soon enough.
Soon, Sammy, soon.
I better be on good behavior today. That's all.
Well, the room's kind of small, so I think 3 people would be like quite friendly in here, right?
Yeah. Well, might be kumbaya a little bit.
Move to the conference room next.
Yeah, we'll take that over next time. Bigger studio. So I think we got a couple of interesting topics. Our favorite words back in the news again, SolarWinds.
Mm-hmm.
CISA's been talking about it. The SEC's been talking about it. Homeland Security now. All kinds of good stuff. I don't know, Brian, you want to kind of walk us through kind of what you saw on some of this, and we'll dive into it.
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest things that's come out is CISA doesn't understand all the cybersecurity tools that are out there in the federal government. So firewalls is the big thing that comes out that they don't understand. Do the agencies even have firewalls or not as one? So it's a big issue. I think, they talk about in the media that I've heard the last few days that, oh, well, if they just had a firewall, it would have blocked it. I want to be clear that that's not the case, right? Most firewalls, they do come blocked, right? And so the very first thing that administrator goes and does is they flip it to any, which now allows all the traffic to come through, right? So it defeats the whole purpose of having a firewall at the end of the day. So that's kind of one of the things that's popped up in the past few days for sure over that.
Yeah, I think to your point, right? I mean, you can have like the most advanced next gen brand new firewall, XYZ vendor, but if it's not configured, if it's just, kind of left wide open, any, or, hey, like a topic we always talk about is, should your servers have access to the internet, right? Do they really need it?
Right.
Probably not, right? So it's more about the policies and the control and the deeper inspection. And, I think firewalls have been around for, I don't know, early 90s, or if not more, like the whole concept of it, right? So it's nothing new. So I really doubt that most of these agencies didn't have one. That's pretty much standard issue. It's more like, hey, is it really configured, and can I detect like the behavior? So, Sammy, from your perspective, since you're kind of in there doing a lot of these, have you ever really had a firewall at some point you couldn't really kind of get past at some point if it wasn't, really, really, really locked down, right?
Yeah, certainly. If it's heavily restricted, then the availability might be limited unless there is some kind of vulnerability within the firewall itself, or perhaps on one of the exposed services running there on the host that you're trying to target. But otherwise, but firewalls by nature, like kind of to your guys' point, if they're not configured in such a way to deny traffic or to deny traffic from specific locations, or to allow traffic from specific locations, that could potentially be exploited. Whatever services are exposed could easily be exploited. They're not by nature going to block malicious traffic, even if it is a next-gen firewall. They might have some heuristics in there that'll detect certain signatures, payload signatures. But other than that, you're going to need that granular management, those granular policies to really stop that kind of traffic from getting into your network. And then to that point, not just inspecting what's coming into the network, but what kind of traffic is going east-west on your network. So between the servers themselves, that's often overlooked. And so that's where, kind of brings in the concept of microsegmentation.
Yeah, once you get through the front door and then you don't have any protection inside the network, then you have full access, right? I mean, if you go back to the Exchange hack with the web shell, once you got in, then you were able to pivot further within the environment and the network. So that's why microsegmentation really is such a huge topic to address in today's world.
Yeah, particularly in the cloud. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. It's like, in my opinion, most people think of like, how do I block stuff from getting in? But also, like, I think it's more important is like, how do I block stuff from getting out, right? It's like, like let's assume that someone's in the network. Mm-hmm. How do I really restrict what they can get to, what ports, what, domains, all that good stuff. So it's a constant care and feeding. I think people sometimes see the firewall as like, well, I have one. Okay, well, the last time you logged in or touched it? I mean, I can't tell you how many times we go into a customer and review a rule set, and there's rules from like 3 or 4 engineers ago that like the app doesn't exist. It's like, well, this is a massive hole. If someone knows what they're looking at, they can just get around the policy and use these ports and things like that. And another thing I think is interesting too is, we're talking about firewalls from a very kind of structured, hey, outside in data center, right? And now we have clouds, we have multiple applications and multi-cloud, and like everything gets dispersed and spread out. And having a single firewall kind of no longer does that same, functionality. So you got to really kind of think about your perimeter, because it's kind of blending and blurring and disappearing for a lot of these companies, right? Private sector and public. So.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's why I think it's important to, at least nowadays, to in your cloud environments, to adopt like a zero trust approach, and to have segmentation at the application level and at the different workloads. Because if you're doing it that way, you're really going to be able to minimize your attack surface, as opposed to just doing it at between VLANs. And at the very least, had a lot of these organizations done this when they were compromised by the SolarWinds attack, it would have minimized the impact or the spread of the attack tremendously, and I think that's where a lot that simple thing is often overlooked. So yeah, they may have gotten onto a system, but if you can mitigate that spread onto the rest of your network, the criticality of that initial vulnerability goes down significantly. So microsegmentation.
Zero trust, microsegmentation. Yeah. There you go. 2 core foundations.
Well, and I also think it's important, like ransomware doesn't, just because you didn't get ransomed doesn't mean that data didn't exfiltrate out of your network.
That's true.
Right? So they could have gotten the data out of your network, and you could have had controls in place that maybe stopped the ransomware. And they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like, just to be clear, like you can still exfiltrate the data out without even doing a ransomware attack. Yeah. But I just think that's important to understand. And another reason why it's important to lock down critical assets within your environment to not have full unfeathered internet access.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead. Sorry about that, Derek.
Just real quick. I think what's funny about this is, it's not funny, but like one of the comments, right, which we're talking about firewalls and the government kind of saying, hey, everyone should have one. Like, okay, yeah, we agree with that. But then literally, like in the same article, it says, the agency does not have any immediate plans to, direct agencies to use firewalls. So it's like, okay, we talk about all this stuff and like what you need, and then they're like, well, we don't actually tell you to recommend one. So it's just very contradictory and kind of comical at some point. So.
Well, and then what rules does CISA really have, or enforcement teeth?
Yeah.
To make everybody do this, right? All they can really do is provide recommendations today, from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think where it gets sticky is because due to the different nuances of each industry and the systems within each industry, they feel limited in their ability to offer guidance, specific or granular guidance regarding configuring these things, because every organization has a different set of requirements. So for them to kind of give a blanket policy that everybody must abide by can end up probably hurting a lot of industries in the short term. So I think that's one of the reasons that they tread carefully with or it could be a laziness thing, but I feel that that's a big reason why they don't actually have that kind of policy in place. Not to say that they shouldn't, and that actually kind of leads into the other piece that we were going to talk about today, which is the classification system of different industries in the United States, and the kind of pushback we've been getting, particularly in the financial industry, in regards to it. Because yes, I think if you fall under a certain category of critical infrastructure, then you should probably have to abide by some of these standards that CISA, new standards that CISA should have in place for these kinds of situations.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's so many different little variables, and to me, it's kind of like your point, saying, hey, I want to kind of force this overarching policy, which not everybody fits in the same bucket or square peg round hole, but it's more of these, as Brian always says, like good practices, best practices, things like that, and more really just kind of more of those guidelines, and offering, hey, here's where we can kind of help, guide and kind of mentor and filter out. And I think we have a lot of various frameworks and things like that we see in the private sector as well. So a lot of these companies kind of like like to kind of adopt these things from the CISA, NIST, things like that. So I have a feeling we'll see kind of some more updated regulations, or not regulations, but guidelines, I should say, about what people should be doing, how they should approach things. And like we've seen some. I know Brian posted us an article about what they're recommending around kind of just ransomware, and there was a recent bulletin from the administration about how to even tackle kind of cybersecurity and working with third-party vendors and all that kind of good stuff. So there's a lot of really cool things, I think, coming out of this, in the last few months, which is, in my opinion, going to ultimately help people, those that take it serious and actually want to do something about it, not just kind of put their head in the sand and don't get breached or something, which sadly happens a lot.
Yep. Brian, I was going to ask you, what were your thoughts on the kind of systematically important critical infrastructure labeling and what that may mean for some of the utility companies and I guess critical infrastructure organizations that we have today?
Yeah, well, there's two thoughts that kind of come to mind, right? That one, there's already some private industries that are out there doing this, like the bit sites of the world, right? And I call it holding a company hostage, because you got to pay to get their solution to be able to see what your rating is. But all of your competitors are rated, and so oftentimes you're forced into having to subscribe to them to get that data.
It's kind of like Yelp, right? Like if you get like one bad review, you got to pay to get it off.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden, all the good reviews, when you do pay, are up top. All the bad ones are hidden. You got to hit that see more button to get down there, right? And then the second thought is whoever is going to hold this data, that's going to be a huge attack target, right? I would just go after that database to get access to it, to know what all the vulnerabilities are, because it's going to be the white pages right there with the name and phone number of who I need to go attack, because they're going to have all those vulnerabilities listed. So I don't know. It's a double-edged sword from that perspective. I think some rules and regulations and third-party audits that were called out in the White House document would be better served to have that third party come in and do that assessment versus having like centralized type of database from that perspective. Yeah,
that's actually a really good point. If you have this kind of consolidated list of critical infrastructure, you potentially make a really good list of targets for other attackers to kind of come after. That's what we see often with cybersecurity insurance companies. They get hacked. And now all of a sudden the attackers have a list of people who are and aren't insured, who are basically willing or not willing to pay the ransom, and then it increases the percent chance of success for their engagement. So really good point you bring up on that one.
It's all about the data gathering at that point, right? I mean, it's almost like it's like you said, it's a full attack in itself on like what you can get and the type of information. And to me, it's like, I think we have a lot of these lists kind of running around already, and like, what's really important and what's critical, but, kind of like, I don't want to say like labeling them like, hey, like you guys are bad, or like this agency is bad, or this, water district is bad because you're not doing something, is maybe the wrong approach. But, I do think there's, things that need to be done, right? And I think maybe some of the also negativity would be like, hey, if you have like these large banks and financial sectors that already spend millions and millions on cybersecurity and probably have a really advanced program compared to some, smaller community bank that doesn't, maybe, I'm not gonna say doesn't take it serious, but just maybe can't afford the people or whatever, like they don't want to be seen as, hey, I got to apply to the same regulations as these people do and things like that. But I think ultimately with everything going on with the pipeline, JBS, SolarWinds, you name it right now, there's a lot of public eyes on cybersecurity that's for those people that are just not in the industry. And I think it's kind of really warranting, both sides of the political spectrum, no matter which side you kind of sit on, as to like, hey, like this is a big deal, right? And like that part I agree with is, what can we do as a country to make our networks and critical infrastructure safer and things like that. My only question is, how do you guys pronounce this? Sissy?
Sissy.
I can't figure out how to.
Let's just go with the second one.
Yeah, I'm not really sure yet. So I was going to read this, and I'm like, too many acracronyms, but that's a good one.
CC sounds pretty good, right? But there's the double consonant in there, so I don't know.
I had to read it like 5 times. Like I don't know. I'm sure we can get some corrections in the comments later or something. So.
Yeah. No, but you bring up a good point. Nobody wants to be told how to do their job, but at the same time, if these organizations aren't doing their job, they have to be held accountable in some way, shape, or form. So I understand the pushback. It's this balance between like privacy and our security, our own autonomy, but at the same time, it's evident now that these organizations are not taking the steps to secure their systems. If segmentation, what we talked about earlier, is like not a new concept. Microsegmentation, it may be a little bit more so now that we have cloud, but still, again, not a new concept. It's at this point, there's little excuse why these kinds of organizations don't have these protections in place. But then again, yeah, how do you find this out? You could do what the SEC did and launch a probe to see if people disclose their breaches, and in doing so, you kind of figure out which organizations are following a stringent cybersecurity policy and which ones aren't. Right? And I don't know if you guys heard about that one, but they had launched that basically to find out who from the SolarWinds compromise actually reported on being compromised, and that brought to me a couple questions on, one, did these companies even know that they were compromised, and two, if they did get compromised, did they not disclose it as a result of some internal? Was it intentional lack of disclosure, or was it just a lack of their policy, not having a stringent policy in place that has that as a part of their procedures, right? Disclosure of these kind of breaches. So I don't know. I would love to know your guys' thoughts on the way the SEC went about that.
Well, we don't have a clear-cut way across the U.S. on how to handle this, right? Every state can pass their own rules and regulations with all of it. Sure, the SEC is over from the financial sense on publicly traded companies, but what about all those private companies that are out there? And honestly, I think so many people did not know that they were breached through this at all. Right. And I think we did find it was a smaller percentage that actually had major impact done to them. Right. Because the attackers didn't have the time to go after every single one that they did compromise from that perspective. So I guess it's a double-edged sword. Like when do you have to report? There are rules and regulations on it. And so maybe they weren't required to because they didn't meet those thresholds or they didn't know about it.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, you're spot on, right? There's a lot of people, probably still don't know to this day that they were affected or are affected. And two is if they're let's just say a less mature in their security model, one is like they don't want to disclose it because they think like, oh man, I think it looks bad, or like I might get fired, which is possible. Or two, it's like, hey, I'm a privately held company. I don't technically have to disclose this to any shareholders. I kind of can just sweep it under the rug. But it raises a lot of questions too about, to your point, like, hey, if they're out there probing, it's also interesting, almost like a phishing exercise. Like, hey, yeah, I'm from, so-and-so, and were you affected by the SolarWinds? Yes or no? And then like they say yes, cool. Let's see if the access is still out there, right? Things like that. But. And
then it's also interesting too, something I thought of, and the article that reported on this wasn't really clear about it, but we know who was compromised because of the action that the Fed took to basically go in and clean up all of the different all the different compromises. So they kind of have a list of organizations that were compromised. And to me, there's a little bit of like gray area entrapment here, because it's like, how did you know these organizations did not report that they were compromised, right? So that to me, that was kind of a sticking point that it goes into more of a conversation about privacy and whether the previous actions taken were justified or legal. I think it was the FBI, now that I remember.
Yeah, we talked about
that. So Sam, are you implying that they actually collaborated to communicate with each other in the government?
For once? Yeah, I think so. Maybe just this one time.
It might be a first. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, but it's an interesting point, right? Because if it would be weird to know that the government knows more about your infrastructure than you do. But maybe that's inherently the problem, So.
Yeah, well, there's still thousands of Exchange servers out there unpatched that are vulnerable. to that web shell attack. It just blows my mind, right? Continues to be a problem.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff in previous episodes, right? It's like at one point do they, kind of start being the, internet police, if you will, and going through and cleaning things up. And then to your point, it brings up a lot of interesting detail around the privacy factor. And, there's going to be so much more regulation around that, and just how connected we are with everything, and, more and more breaches and attacks. And still, like every day, here we are talking about SolarWinds again, and like now it's less from a technical aspect and more about like the fallout and the regulation and like what's coming in the future and what that's really mandating. So there's going to be a lot more to come on things like this for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I know NIST published that ransomware risk management document. So it's NIST IR 8374. Again, NIST IR 8374. It's still in draft stage, but it goes back into, it's a short document. It's not that long, but some of the key things that you have to do to recover from future ransomware event. And so basically that means you need to do this now. You can't do it when you're in the middle of the ransomware, but you need to have an incident recovery plan, right? So you got to make and develop it now and understand, like, it really needs to be a flow chart of decisions already pre-made so that when you're in the fire, you're not having to figure out, do I go left or do I go right? And do I make a wrong decision? You already know, right? So you made the plan and now you're working the plan from that perspective. And then backup and restore. It's about restoration. Backup doesn't really matter. It's, can you really restore the data from it? So you have to already plan, implement, and test the data backup strategy. And you got to make sure it's isolated, right? So I just wrote this in the 97 InfoSec book, or InfoSec things people need to know. I wrote it in the book there that essentially just because it's immutable storage doesn't mean you're okay. Right. So think about all the cold cloud storage out there. Stop paying the bill. What happens? They delete it.
That's right.
Right. So it's not truly immutable storage. Sure, it's write once, read many, right? The worm type of philosophy, if you will. But you really got to think through that and understand, like, is my data really offsite?
Who owns
right?
The data at the
and
end
then,
of the day?
Honestly, what's old is new again. Tape. Probably not a bad idea with ransom, to be honest.
Come back, yeah.
Right. And yes, you can switch to disk backups, and as long as they're all encrypted, etc., that's okay. But do you have a copy of your encryption key that you use on the backup software so that when you have to re-image and deploy a new backup machine because it was ransomed, and have that key so that you can recatalog all your your data to restore it? How many times does that happen?
Hopefully not on a server that was breached and then ransomed, and then now it's encrypted. And
right.
It's just nowhere else.
Right.
You got to have it somewhere else that's safe and secure.
A nice
in a
USB
lockbox.
thumb drive and somewhere else,
Yeah.
physically separate.
And then have all your contacts up to date, ready to go, because you're not going to have time to go look up, how do I contact CISA? How do I contact the FBI? Who's my vendor that's on retainer? Who's my cybersecurity insurance? All of that stuff needs to be dialed up and ready to go, right? And so it's okay to have copies of that printed out, filed away in a lockbox, ready to pull out in the event that occurs from that. Because you don't want that information on your desktop, because the bad guys will get that, right? It needs to be in an encrypted area that you have access to all of that.
I think the other thing too, just kind of going back to your IR plans, like you don't need anything super complicated, 200-page documents. If you're just starting out, there's some great templates out there to kind of start from, and even just, a couple of pages, flow charts, just to kind of get the conversation going with your team or your executives. I think it's a really key starting point.
And NIST has a template that you're able to follow, right? So you can go download their template and start from there. And there's other templates that are out there as well that you can copy and paste if you have to from that perspective. But in an academic setting, don't copy paste without citing.
There you go.
So I have to get my disclaimer in there being a TA.
That's the teacher and Brian coming
right?
out.
Yeah.
But in the corporate world, we all know that's how policies and procedures generally come about, right? But there's your warning there. But I mean, it's just back to the basics, and they cover a lot of this stuff. They have extra resources and everything in this NIST preliminary guide here. So again, that's the NIST IR 8374. I know I've said it 3 times, but I think it's important.
We can post a link in the chat window or something
to get that exactly. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I had for today. I don't know if you guys.
I think we're good. Actually, there's one thing I want to touch on MFA real quick. One of our favorite topics. Only reason I bring it up is because we got some new shirts being made. MFA, all the things, if you can see it. So
All the things.
famous slogan of us around here, and something we strongly believe in. So definitely add that to your overall cybersecurity policy and strategy. So.
Oh yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that people got hit and re-hit because they didn't put in MFA in their environment. And it's so easy just to go do 2 or 3 applications and call it a day and say, oh, we deployed it. But then you left these gaping holes of your CRM system or your HR system or some
Or
other
your GitHub
that you didn't take the effort to go deploy it for when you're already licensed for it and you had it or whatever. So just make sure that you look at your critical assets that you have.
There's more than you think.
And that you deployed it, because it's not just the 3 main things that you think you use.
Not just
every day.
email.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I can't tell you how many public GitHubs out there don't use MFA.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. I mean, we can have probably a whole show on just that alone and best practices or good practices.
How to not expose your your private GitHub to the public. That can easily be a show.
Leaky buckets. That could be a conversation in itself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you for the show. It was another good one, and we'll see everybody in a couple of weeks. Take care.
All right.
Also,
thanks,
smash
guys.
that subscribe button.
Yeah, don't forget, wherever it
Like and
is.
share and all that good stuff.
Take care.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Take care, guys.